All right, good evening again, everybody, and welcome to OTF Connects Presents Gamification and Game-Based Learning Assessment and Evaluation with Derek Schellenberg. All right, Derek, I'm going to pass it over to you, and we'll get started right away. So welcome, everybody, and I'm looking forward to a great session here tonight.
Thanks very much, Colin. Welcome, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. You're comfortable. We finally have some summer weather, so that is a good thing. I couldn't believe that we were having snow in April. That was baffling to me. Just got back from cycling class, so if I'm a little bit winded, hopefully my voice will recover, but I think we're going to be fine. So tonight's session is Gamification and Game-Based Learning Assessment and Evaluation. It's relatively, I think, new in terms of applying gamification and game-based learning to education, the public school system. So hopefully there'll be some new things, and hopefully you can share some of the things that you do as well. I'm always impressed by educators spending their own time to develop their learning. So a little bit of background information about me. I've been teaching English in the York Region District School Board for more than 15 years. It's getting closer to 20 now, so I'm going to have to change that soon. Currently department head of English at a BYOD blended learning high school, which basically means that we have about 1,200 students, and they all bring a different type of computer to class every day. So in some cases it's a tablet, but in most cases it's a laptop, it could be a netbook, and sometimes it's a $2,000 MacBook as well. So our challenge is delivering curriculum over these multiple different types of devices on a daily basis. And of course, there's also the distraction factor that we have to keep in mind. And I'm currently an MA candidate at UOIT in Education and Digital Technologies. So we're going to start with a little question. We're going to use the poll just very quickly. I want to find out, in terms of elementary and secondary, what our breakdown is. So if you are an elementary teacher, can you just use the check mark? And if you're a secondary teacher, please don't take offense. I'm a secondary teacher. Can you use the X? And we'll just see what we've got here. I feel like I'm getting a lot of negative feedback from these secondary people. Okay, so this is good. So I think we're roughly equal. Maybe we've got, yeah, we look approximately equal. Okay, so what we're going to do first is get a little bit of information, thoughts from you. So we've got gamification and game-based learning, which I assume is sort of why you chose to take part in this session. And then we've got the assessment and evaluation piece. So how does it look different in the world of gamification? So before we dig into that, which will happen a little bit later in tonight's webinar, my thought personally, and you may have a totally different perspective than myself, is that this is one of our topics, kind of like politics, kind of like religion. You have to be careful in terms of what you talk about, who you talk to with, about what you do, and sometimes we're not always willing to share what our assessment and evaluation practices look like, partially because we have this feeling of we might be judged, whether it's by a colleague or an administrator or whatever. So what we're going to do in just a second is we're going to click on a link, and the link will be provided in the chat box, or if you want, you can type it in, but the link's there. Thanks, Colin. And we're going to go to a Padlet. So I'm going to meet you in there. So once you get into the Padlet, what you're going to do is you're going to double-click anywhere you like, and you're going to answer the question in terms of why is assessment and evaluation a taboo topic for teachers. If you don't like the question, if you don't share this perspective, totally fine. It's a little biased. Then you can answer in terms of why you think it's not a taboo topic for teachers. And there we go. I'm just sharing my answer, or at least an answer. Okay, so I'll take a look at what we've got so far. So we've got philosophy in the far right. Teachers have different ideas about the purposes of assessment and how to best use it in class. Okay. We don't want to admit we're too easy or too hard in the way we evaluate. I know some of us take pride in being hard in terms of how we mark, and some people might feel that we want to sort of give students the benefit of the doubt in terms of how we mark. Often not consistent. I think that's really interesting. I'm in a department now where we have 52 different courses, so being consistent at least over courses of the same grade or the same stream can be a challenge. Many think it's negative, and it's often discussed in the Con Ed PD that we are given. So some interesting answers. I know people are still adding. Because it can bring out a sense of inadequacy, some don't do it, throw it down the stairs. The heavy ones get the higher mark, which is tough when all my assignments are paperless. It's hard to get a full picture of students learning. Okay, so that's great. So it gives us a little bit of feedback. I'm going to ask Colin to pull me back into the Blackboard room. There we go. So, in terms of a starting point, this webinar tonight is going to basically have 3 sections to it, or 3 levels in terms of gamification. So first off is a little bit of history in terms of assessment and evaluation, how my journey has evolved, and hopefully we won't spend too long on that. And then we'll get into level 2, and that will be consideration of some elements from gamification and game-based learning, some of which you may want to adopt or adapt into your classroom, into your teaching and your students' learning. And my advice always is don't try to do everything the first time, or you'll be spending your summer gamifying everything that you do. And then we have level 3. So possible applications of gamification and game-based learning, specifically in assessment and evaluation. So an initial concept to think about in terms of level 1 before we get started is this idea of mastery learning. So this is a quote. It's actually from Bergman and Sams. They're kind of the forerunners in terms of Flip Your Classroom. You should definitely read that book. It's not too long, but it gives you some great ideas, not only for using the flipped classroom, but also other things that can be applied to anyone's teaching practice. But one of their key ideas is that we should have at least some aspects of our teaching where students can move at their own pace. So this involves mastery learning, and this is a big challenge when you have a class of 25 to 30 people, and to learn a series of objectives. So they've got these targeted objectives that they're all working towards. People may be moving ahead, people may be behind. And I'm thinking, I don't know why, but I'm thinking of DRA when I was in elementary school in terms of these reading levels, and it was amazing in terms of we're all reading at a different level, and that's fine, and everyone's moving at a different pace, and that also is fine. So that's one key concept that we want to think about. So 15, 18 years ago, go to my first school. The soccer coach was the principal, hired me, said, you're going to teach English, you're going to teach business, and you're going to coach the soccer team. And we were just sort of figuring out what the heck are these rubrics. And as you can see, if this is close to what my first rubric looked like, I did not know what I was doing. Yes, we had our 4 categories on the left. We had some descriptors and criteria. I think this is actually better than my first rubric. We put our feedback directly on the assignment, and we thought it was some sort of monk-like task where I had to write almost as much feedback as the student's assignment in terms of in the margins. And then we came up with these categories, and they were pretty loose in terms of this is out of 25, and this is out of 10, and this is out of 15. And there wasn't necessarily thought in terms of why we were doing it. This is actually better probably than my first rubric because at least I've got 4 equal categories. So this was where we sort of started, or at least where I started at my first school. So I went to a new school. It had just been opened. It was the second year the school was up and running. I'm still there. And basically I walked in and these school policy A&E posters were everywhere, and there was this sort of scale in terms of we were going to use levels, and so our rubrics did not have percentages on them. They did not have numbers on them. They had level 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes they had level R, and we would assign in these 4 categories these levels. And what we would do in the English department after we had got our assignments marked is we would record them in these tracking logs you can see on the right here. And so we had our, what at the time was called a diagnostic essay, and then we did presentations, and we would mark the level per category. And when it came time to actually report the report card, midterm mark, 6, 8 weeks in, whatever, what we would do is we would look at most recent and consistent. And to me, I love this idea in terms of professional judgment. You're coming up with what you think is the student's most consistent mark, and if they've been improving, as you hope they have been, then it would be a reflection of that. So we had 4 minus for the first one, and 4 minus for the second, and 3 plus for the third, and 3 plus for the fourth. And that was based on me looking down that column and determining what I think is a fair mark for the student at that reporting period. And of course, by the time we got to the end, at the end of the semester, after 18 weeks, we would have tons of data. And again, we would use our professional judgment to come up with a mark, and then you would convert it back. So if I had a 4 minus, they would get 82% in knowledge. If I had a 3 plus, they would get a 78%. So it was an interesting concept. I loved it. Eventually, we moved away from it. So then along came growing success, and we sort of changed, our language. So we went from diagnostic, formative, and summative, and then we had our assessment for learning, as learning, and of learning. So there was this evolution in terms of the language. In terms of what we were doing, I think in our particular department, we were pretty good at having diagnostic and formative tasks. So it was just more about identifying, changing the language in terms of how we communicated with each other, how we communicated with parents, and how we communicated with students. So this is sort of our current setup. Basically what we've got is for every assignment that the students do, we hit all 4 categories. So 30, 30, 20, 20. You could say that's arbitrary. We've got a high school down the road that does 25, 25, 25, 25. At our particular school, we determined in the English department that we thought these 2 categories at the top here were worth more. And so basically, when we designed the 1 or 2 assignments for each unit, we have to make them big, robust, complex tasks that are going to incorporate all these different categories in them. So we don't count quizzes. We don't usually have tests. But if we did, we would have to design them with this ratio in mind. So if I was going to make a test out of 50, it would be 15, 15, 10, 10. So basically what that translated into is you had about 6, 7 term assignments per course, and they would add up to 70%. And then we would have our culminating work, 30%. And currently it's 18% for this 18-week independent study, which involves multiple texts. And then we have our final exam where it's 12%. So this is just current practice. Don't know about you, love it. We can now implement our marks online from anywhere. Teach Assist in terms of report cards, fantastic. Hopefully you've got something like this. It's an amazing opportunity. So again, we've got here at the top diagnostic tasks, and then we have our major assignments for each unit. And this is what it translates to for the student, which is a lot of information. This is at the end of the course. Again, we have our diagnostic information at the top, and then we have our major assignment for each. They're all weighted the same. These 2 that are worth 50 each would be half of the assignment and half of the assignment. And then at the bottom we have our 2 culminating tasks, the independent study, and the final exam. So we've got a T here with the problem, but that's okay. So basically, this is what we've come to. this is what we've come to in terms of a grade 9 student walking into our school. This would be his rubric or her rubric for the major task that's going to be worth 18% of his final mark. So I'm going to pause here and hopefully get a little feedback for you before we dig into gamification and game-based learning. What do you think are the pros and cons of having something like this as your tool to evaluate and assess students? So I'm hoping you guys will use the chat box and give me some positives and negatives, not going to hurt my feelings, in terms of what you think about. I know you can't read the actual text, but what do you think about this as a tool for grade 9 students?
And I'm just.
So Mark says that.
Sorry, Derek. I was just going to jump in and also invite people to jump on the microphone if they would prefer just to to chime in that way. I always like hearing people's voices as well. So I'm going to encourage you to please grab a mic and jump in as well.
Perfect. So Mark is brave and says students know what they're being evaluated on, so it's very clear. This represents 18 weeks worth of work. They have to read 3 books to do this. Clarity for sure. So I'm assuming that's a pro. Any cons?
Oh, sorry. Do you mind if I jump in?
Absolutely. Go ahead. Sorry, not sure who that was, but feel free to share. So Allison's question, okay, hold on here. Let's go to Aaron. It seems dense, a lot for the student to take in. It would have to be gone over thoroughly, especially if a rubric like this is new to them. So I'm imagining, Aaron, that it would be new to them in terms of moving from elementary to secondary, and we would have to go over it in detail. And basically, for example, the first one in thinking, if we go across, that would be a creative writing task, like a journal, where they have to write as if they are the character in the book. So we would look at that task. It would be done individually. They would get a mark. They would see it on their Google document, whatever. They would get feedback for it. But yeah, we would have to do that. Allison, is this co-created? This is definitely not co-created. This is something that they get first week when they walk in. So Colin's question, can it be overwhelming to some kids? It's hard to know in terms of that. I think keep in mind at our school, they're walking in, they have to use technology. They've never done that before in grade 9 English. They're getting this rubric. They're figuring out what Google Drive is. I think in total, it's all pretty overwhelming. But kids are amazing in terms of they just start going, well, this is normal. He's given me all of our assignments for the entire course, and we're going to work through them, and we're going to ask questions, and we're going to post our questions, whether it's on Moodle or Google Classroom, and away we go. So they do adapt. Con, overwhelming, depending on the language in the rubric. Yeah, language can be a challenge, especially if we've got ESL students and other students where this would be difficult. Lots of info. Okay, dense. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And the subjective part that Melissa's bringing up is a real challenge, and we found that with a lot of our initial curriculum, rubric designs. So what we try to do on the left-hand side is give sort of detail in terms of what we're looking for, and we focus on that more than actually the category. So we would go down through the detail on the left, and then we would go through, let's say, level 4. Let's assume that we're all aspiring to level 4, and we would sort of come to a conclusion there in terms of what we're looking for. So this is sort of a current rubric, and all those challenges that you're talking about are things that I'm thinking about with my 30 grade 9 students. I had 3 classes on them last semester, trying to figure out what's the best way to help them decipher this, even though I enjoyed making it. So we get data, tons and tons of data, 3 pages of data per course for all our students at the end. And I just had to throw this in here. I think you've got professional judgment, which is sometimes subjective, as Melissa says, in all of that marking, in all of that evaluation and assessment. And I had one teacher, and she's amazing. She was a consultant, and now she's a vice principal at one of our schools. And this is what she would hand in at every reporting period in terms of, here's all my data, here's all my marking, here's the marks that the computer generated, and here's my professional judgment in play. So in some cases the mark would go up, some cases the mark would go down, and she was using her professional judgment to determine what she thought was a fair mark for that kid, both at midterms and then at the end of the school year, which is a challenge when everything is so transparent and visible 24/7. My mark was this, my mark was this, my mark was this, and suddenly my mark is that. So sometimes it would go up, sometimes it would go down. But she had that will and belief in terms of professional judgment to make those changes at the end of each semester, at the end of each reporting period, which I had to respect. And then here we have just an experiment this year where we're trying to remove some of that language out. And so this is something that we discovered relatively new, and it's a one-point rubric. And so again, we have the criteria on the left. We've tried to be a little bit more precise with our marks. And then we just focus on provincial standard in terms of level 3, in terms of giving them some description. So you're always fighting that battle in terms of, do I give them too much information? Was it not enough? Do they know what my expectations are? And of course, having strong and weak exemplars really helps in terms of going through that information. So to me, it feels a little bit like we've come full circle after 15 years, 18 years, that sort of thing. We've got the same challenges in terms of trying to be transparent, trying to give them the criteria in terms of the language that they understand. And then we've got some new challenges in terms of our students reading the rubrics, and then the challenge again as well is, are they taking on this feedback? Can they even apply it later if I give it at the end of the unit? Because now we've moved on to something new. So these are all challenges that we have in terms of how best do I assess and evaluate my students. So now we're going to move on from assessment and evaluation. Hopefully it didn't put anyone to sleep there, that little inquiry or evolution in terms of my practice. And we're going to focus on hopefully what's the good stuff. So gamification and game-based learning, some key elements that you can keep in mind, some of which you may totally buy into. Maybe you're already implementing them in your classroom, and some of which you might have a problem with and say, I don't know if I even agree with that pedagogically, and that's fine. We've got a quote here from Jane McGonigal. Again, she gamifies her life, every aspect of it, but her book, Reality is Broken, is fantastic. And so here she says, the more challenging the work, the more motivated you are to do it. So this idea of giving kids work that's actually challenging as opposed to easy, and they're actually going to enjoy it more when they're challenged than when it's not that difficult. This is actually a quote where she's talking about the most successful massive multiplayer online role-playing game, which is World of Warcraft, and she's talking about how people are committed to this, millions and millions of people around the world, because of this exact reason. The more challenging the work, the more motivated they are to do it. And yeah, I just think it's a really interesting idea in terms of, there's another person who's an expert on gamification, James Paul Gee, and he started playing some of these video games that the kids play, and he can't believe the complexity of the tasks that they're willing to do outside of school. And he found it much more challenging and complex than some of the things that we asked them to do in school. So again, this idea of, maybe we need to make things in some cases possibly more challenging in order to invigorate our students and get them motivated. So some people, I'm not sure why, have a problem with the differences between gamification and game-based learning. So I've put them both in the title, just attempting to define them a little bit here, and then hopefully we'll never talk about them again. But on the right is, I think, the easier of the two, perhaps it's the easier of the two concepts to instantly grasp. And it's the idea of, I take an existing game, I play it in my classroom, I play it with my students, or I play it with my children, I play it with some sort of learners, and then we focus on different aspects of it and connect it, and hopefully to the curriculum expectations. So you identify a game, You bring it into your classroom, and then you sort of highlight the teachable aspects of it and bring those to the forefront. So in one high school in our board, first week, history class, in one or two of the first lessons of that first week, they play Risk. And the idea is they're going to make some connections in terms of that game to their curriculum and hopefully get the idea that history can be fun right at the beginning. Gamification, which I think is what you would be interested in, is the idea that we identify game mechanics, first of all, in game design, and then we choose which ones we're going to use, and we apply them to our own classroom. We apply them to help motivate and engage our learners, and hopefully this translates into greater academic success. So teacher becomes the game designer with the curriculum. So that's sort of the difference between gamification and game-based learning. So I want you to pause for a second. What are characteristics of games is a question that I want you to wrestle with a little bit. When we go to the next slide, what I'm hoping that you're going to do is come up with characteristics of games, not just characteristics, but characteristics of games that you already use or would like to see in classrooms, in education, in learning. So what are characteristics of games which would be fantastic if we could bring them into the classroom? So what I'm going to ask you to do, as opposed to the Padlet, is to type right here in the actual slide and see if you can give us some feedback in terms of what are characteristics of games that you think would be amazing if we could see them in learning with our students.
So in order to do that, if you don't know, folks, on the left side of the whiteboard, there is a tool strip, and there should be one there with a letter on it. You can click that one with the letter, and then that allows you to create a text box right on the whiteboard. And I see one person, Mariette, is on a tablet. It won't work on a tablet, unfortunately, so if you wanted to add something, you can just drop it in the chat box for us, okay? People seem to be getting it. Excellent.
So we have, so far, interactivity, engaging, motivating, encouraging learning of a concept, fun, communication, competition, teamwork is fantastic, included knowledge, ideas, subject matter, so we need, obviously, to make that connection, merge those things, involves critical thinking skills, and then I think I can see problem solving as well. So these are a bunch of interesting ideas in terms of characteristics of games. And one thing that I try to do in my classes is moving them in terms of a continuum from being dependent on me to independent of me in terms of their learning. Yes, I'm going to have to help in a number of things, but having them more self-reliant, release of responsibility. And then ultimately, I think if the class is really successful, this idea of interdependence in terms of depending on each other. They have different strengths, different weaknesses, and they can help each other. And I think gamification, that's definitely one thing it can do, is lead to that interdependence where learners are helping learners. So we've got a couple more ideas here. Competition, collaboration, doesn't feel like school, self-reliant, fantastic. Okay, so these are some great ideas in terms of characteristics of games. These are some ideas that we also want to keep in mind. So similar to the question that I asked you, on the left-hand side, we can identify that most games we play have some rules. There's an open competition to them, meaning that we're aware that we're competing against each other. It could be 1 versus 1, it could be teams, whatever. One really important idea is the idea of starting at 0. So as opposed to I'm perfect until I hand in my first assignment, which maybe is not our student's mindset. But the idea of we start at 0. You're currently getting 0 in this course, and you are going to accumulate marks, you're going to accumulate points as you proceed through this unit or this assignment or this course of study. What makes a game fun sometimes as well is elements of chance, so we don't want it to be all predictable. And another challenging task for us as teachers is this idea of multiple opportunities. And when I say that, I mean multiple opportunities to demonstrate learning. So I think what happens, certainly what happens in my classroom and some of my colleagues' classrooms, is we get to the end of the units, there is a summative task to use older language that the students complete, and they complete it, and that's their opportunity. And whether they get a 30 or a 50 or a 70 or a 90, we move on to the next unit. And so some kids are successful, and they've got that strong foundation, and some aren't. And games aren't designed that way. Games are designed that you stop, and you cannot proceed until you've demonstrated that you understand the concepts. Increasingly difficult for a lot of games, and then we've got beginning and ending, so that it's finite, and then there's a cyclical aspect. I'm not going to look at the skills and actions. I think a lot of those we came up with in the previous slide. But gamification characteristics, these are things that you might consider using in your classroom. If you use Teach Ontario, you can see there's a little bit of discussion going on right now, primarily elementary teachers in terms of the use of avatars, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The use of points, how do we use points, how do we differentiate points from marks? Leveling up, so I'm moving up in levels as I proceed through the content. Badges, boss battles, some people use that as a term for the summative assignment. You are now ready to face the boss, which is the big challenge on each level. Having a leaderboard and being sensitive in terms of how you use that leaderboard. Am I going to use it for teams? Am I going to use it for individuals? Do I want to have actual all 25 kids' names on that if it's for individuals? So some things to keep in mind. And then we have groups, quests, and then really important, I think, as well, is the idea of if we're going to have a game, it needs to have some sort of theme, needs to have some sort of narrative, meaning a story that sort of pulls the pieces together. Kids are much more likely to get engaged if there's a sense of narrative in the story, and we'll talk about the different types of themes or narratives you can incorporate if you attempt to do this. So a couple terms to contemplate that get used around playing games and gamification, and this is Lee Sheldon, who's a professor, and he wrote the book, The Multiplayer Classroom, and this idea of fiero, or pride, and again, when I'm doing challenging work, when I am successful, especially if I failed a couple times and I had taken multiple opportunities, is this feeling of exhilaration. So I'm triumphing over this difficult challenge that I've faced. So this is one concept that we get in games. Again, we have the concept of the avatar, and it creates this interesting distance between the student and the avatar. The avatar is playing the game, the avatar is in the game. In the units that we create, the avatar is engaged in the activities, the avatar is assigned the points as part of the team. So it's interesting in terms of how students, some of them will make the avatar exactly the same as them, and some will make it quite different. And we have had some gender experimenting as well. And then this other idea is the idea of the group, the team. In some cases, it's called a guild. And so we create these teams. For me, they're teacher selected. You may have students select them depending on how often you use it. And it could be a variety of levels, or you could have, you know, if we were doing reading, and you might want to organize them in terms of stronger and weaker readers in different levels, and maybe they're at the same points. But I like, for example, to have leaders within groups and people taking on different roles at different times. So the idea of a guild. Okay, so here's some common themes that people choose when they gamify some aspect of their course. I'm not sure if Mariette wants to jump in. If I'm going too fast, or if anybody has questions, that might have been a ton of information there, I'm not sure. Feel free to ask a question and slow me down a little bit. Nope? Okay. So, excuse me. In terms of themes, what we have here is 6 of the most obvious ones. So on the top left, we have the idea, which might be perfect if you were doing this in a history class, of time travel. And we're going to time travel back in history and explore different things. And there's a number of stories that have actually been written about that. And so that would be your overarching theme to the activities that you were doing for that unit or for that assignment or whatever. And you would build it around the idea of time travel. In the middle, of course, common theme, fantasy. We have science fiction on the right. The mystery in terms of whodunit. And then we've got the explorer, the pirate, the map in the middle. And then the latest trend in the last couple of years that seems so popular, not only the apocalypse, but we must have the zombie apocalypse. So maybe that's going to be good for your science class if you're going to explore how to solve some problem, because we have these zombies and they're at the door and they're about to come in. So these are different themes that you can choose in terms of how you're going to create this gamifying lens. The next thing that you probably are going to want to attempt to do is come up with a way to have students generate an avatar. Again, it increases that engagement level as their avatar experiences different things and engages in certain things. In Teach Ontario, the conversation was around the idea of bit strips for schools. And in that case, you see a lot of students creating avatars that are very similar to themselves. And then we have Bitmoji, which is related. Might even be owned by the same company. In some of my colleagues' classes in grade 9 and 10, they use superhero creators or superhero generators, and the students will generate a character. If they want, they can make them look very similar to an existing Marvel character, but Marvel has one. Create your own superhero, and DC, which is Marvel's main competitor, has one as well. Now, to me, that looks perhaps a little more elementary than secondary in terms of that option, but it's an option for you as well. And there are others. One thing we do want to keep in mind with all these tools, I know York Region is the same, is probably it's going to be better if the teacher creates the account and student information is not given out. So we don't give out student names, we don't give out phone numbers. Obviously, we don't give out student numbers. So you need to sort of create those accounts, which you can do with some of these, and then it protects you and it protects the students as well. And then the one that I'm going to show you a little bit more about is the idea of classcraft. And classcraft goes far beyond the idea of just creating an avatar. It does do that, but if you want to gamify your classroom and want the least amount of work in terms of experimenting with the concept, Classcraft is a great place to start, and all of these are free. One other concept that you may want to experiment with is the idea of having badges in terms of students being able to do additional tasks beyond the basic tasks that you want them to do, and to get additional points for those tasks. So what happens is, in our MIF unit in grade 9, for the 4 different levels, which are approximately 4 different weeks of that unit, we create badges, 3 of them per level, and we hide them. So they act as Easter eggs as well. Some students find them and they share, some students find them and they don't, and some students complete the additional tasks, and obviously this is above and beyond, so this speaks to them in terms of the competitiveness. And basically it's adding that bit of randomness, that bit of unpredictability that's going to be fun. Some people do print them off. We don't. We use Google Docs, and we digitally add them to our avatar as we proceed through the unit. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just go.
Yes, Mary had a quick question there, asking about badges and motivation.
Okay.
You can see it in the chat. I've never understood how badges motivate. Is it like game level, so it motivates? What's your experience on that? And I actually wondered, how do you hide them? You mentioned you just hide the badges. I wondered about the mechanics of how do you actually use them.
Right. So what happens is, first off, the badges are, what we do is we use Moodle, and we have a link to a Google website for each unit of the grade 9 course. So I've got a Google site for the Myth unit, Google site for the Drama unit, and it's this website that the students interact with, and it's set up, and I can show it to you, and it's set up in terms of levels. And what we do is we take those badges, the description for each one, and we hide them in the Google site in terms of the students have to find which word, and there's, it's a very big site, will open up. They can find the links. Once they start getting the idea that it's a link on the page, they get very good at sort of scanning the pages and identifying where the link is to the badge, and then you have students who will go and work together and find those, and then they go and complete the tasks. So in terms of how they motivate, the tasks are fun. So in one, they're doing something, for example, that gives them additional responsibility or additional power or whatever. So in one case, I don't know, what is it, level 3 or something, there's some kind of alchemist badge or whatever, and they get to design a mini task that connects to what we're learning at that point in the course, in the unit, and they assign it to another one of their competing groups. So they get points for actually designing the task, and this is one of the higher level badges, and then other students get points if they complete the task. So they'll actually choose their neighbors in terms of another team and assign it to them. Some of the, the low level badges that we have might be they get together after they've created their avatar and they design a house shield. And then they might write a backstory for themselves in terms of how did their character develop. This is high school English, so everything is connected both in this particular unit to both mythology and to reading and writing and those sorts of things. So some students are finding them. They're taking another example of a different badge is one group is doing a presentation, and the other group who's found this badge goes into their Google presentation while they're presenting and gives them feedback, positive, constructive feedback on how they're doing, and they earn points for doing that task. So it helps the other group in terms of receiving the feedback in real time while they're presenting, and it helps them in terms of being better at reflecting on their own strengths and weaknesses when they have to do that assignment. So there's about 12 of them, and they're lots of fun. I think I did not scroll down to the chat, so there's probably some additional comments there. Anybody else have other questions or comments? Just pausing here. Once I get into mode, it's tough to check the chat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a little bit of Classcraft to give you an idea of both how it works and how you might attempt to apply something similar in terms of gamifying your class. So in terms of Classcraft, as I said, it's free. There, of course, like a lot of the different programs online, you can pay for additional features. If you pay, you get pets. Your students can have pets for their avatars, which is very exciting. One of my colleagues did do that, so probably put some pressure on me for the next time I go through this course. And so you can see here I have a number of different courses, and if I click on them, this is one view of all of my students and the different points that they accumulate for different things. And you can also group them in terms of their house, and I take no responsibility for their house names. They chose different things. So in this class we have House Goat, House Hydra, Medusa, Mermaid, Titan. I did choose the groupings in terms of trying to balance them, in terms of strengths and weaknesses. And then we've got, for each person in the class, we've got their avatar. And the nice thing about their avatar, sorry if I'm going too quickly here, is that it evolves. So it's not something static. As they're increasing in levels, their avatar will actually evolve. So what happens is they have an initial choice in terms of gender. They have an initial choice in terms of appearance. And they have a choice in terms of, are they going to be a healer, a warrior, or a mage? So basically what you're looking for is the group to get together and to try to balance themselves, because there's going to be different strengths and weaknesses of different characters. So you can see here, as they're moving up through the level, they get different powers and abilities. Now, the other nice thing about using Classcraft is you can tailor all aspects of it. So if you don't like the fact that one of the powers is class teleport, where they can all leave 5 minutes early, maybe your admin is not going to be that supportive of that idea, then you can change that power to something else. So you can tailor every individual aspect of it. What they do love is that every day there's random events. This is usually how we start our day, keeping in mind this is not an LMS. It's not a learning management system. So this isn't your Moodle. This isn't your Google Classroom. This isn't Edmodo, if that's what you're using. This is going to help in terms of they're going to be excited to do certain activities, to help each other. You could use it for answering questions. You could use it for me. They automatically get a certain amount of points if before the lesson starts, their computer is up, it's open, it's on, they're in Google Classroom, then they get 50 points just for that. So it's a behavioral management system. It's not a learning management system. So these are the ideas of some of the random events. And there are ones that say the teacher will now sing a song or this sort of thing. So again, you want to go through them carefully and adjust any that you might not be comfortable doing. And like everything else, they're constantly adding features. So this is new from last time. They've added this idea of quests. If you need, for any reason, to have some sort of random group or random player chosen, then you would use this.
Derek, just a question. I know you can't see a question in the chat. Can group house members see each other's results or scores, or is it just you that's able to see it as the educator?
Right. So they can see, in this case, they can see how they're doing individually. So if I want to show them the how everybody's doing, I can. But if I don't want to, then I don't have to. Okay, they can see how they're doing individually.
So you can tailor that then?
Yeah, so just like anything else, I wouldn't necessarily share some information with the whole class on my LCD projector at the front, because some information you wouldn't want. But for the most part, this is supposed to be something fun, and I think you also have to be careful in terms of if you use this a lot, it could actually sort of become a monster in terms of taking up a certain amount of time. So you've got to use it well. I have one math friend who's the assistant head of math at our school. His kids love it, but one particular kid in his class can't handle it because he's constantly checking how many points do I have? How do I get more points? I need so many more points to do this. But that's one student in terms of the classes that are trying it at our particular school. Any other questions?
Okay, thanks.
No problem. So that's just a look into.
We did have one pop up.
Yep.
Sorry, just Michelle wants to know: is it more appropriate for junior division from grade 5 onwards, or more for high school? Like, who is it really appropriate for?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I would say that I would probably not use Classcraft with my grade 12s because they might think that they were too cool to have an avatar that was a mage, healer, whatever, with certain powers, whereas grade 9 and 10, the students love it. My son is in grade 7, and he's been, unfortunately for my son's teacher, bugging her for months in terms of adopting it in grade 7. So I think, in terms of grade 5, I don't see any reason why you couldn't use it. You would just have to go through and tailor it. And I think what it does have is it has the ability to both reward and penalize students for behaviors. And I don't myself use a lot of the penalties. I don't go around saying, you weren't paying attention, -50, or you weren't doing this, whatever. I could. It has these initial 4 or 5 positive and 4 or 5 negative, and I could tailor them if I wanted to. But for me, it's about positively accumulating, points through good behavior, good actions, asking questions, asking original questions, helping each other, as opposed to I'm going to penalize you because I have this power and you don't, and that sort of thing. But yeah, I don't see any reason why you couldn't use it with elementary classes.
Cool. Thanks.
No problem. So I think, Colin, we'll probably return to the to Blackboard and then keep on going from there. Okay, so that was just a little look in terms of Classcraft. And now we're going to proceed to level 3 and talk a little bit about some of the application or how you could apply it. And if we have time, perhaps, I will show you how I've applied it in some of my classes. So one concept which we've already mentioned is this idea that gamifying education enables students to have multiple opportunities to demonstrate learning based on individual student readiness. So this idea is requires some thinking on the part of the teacher in terms of how am I going to allow multiple opportunities, if I am going to allow it, and how do I determine student readiness, that the student is able to do the summative task or face the boss or whatever you want to call it. So a question that gets asked by some people who use gamification is, and I don't think it's totally translated here on the slide, but basically the question is, would you want, at the top, and the first one on the left here is, would you want a surgeon to perform heart bypass on you if she knew 60 or 70% of the organs in the human body? Would you want a pharmacist who only knew how to make 65% of the commonly prescribed drugs? An accountant, we just filed our tax files a couple months back. Would you want your accountant to prepare your annual tax files if she only knew 55% of the material? And then lastly, we have the lovely Leonardo DiCaprio. I think in Catch Me If You Can. Would you want a pilot to fly your airplane if you only knew 60% of the instruments in the cabin? So of course the answer to these is no, a resounding no. Leonardo actually knew a lot less, I think, than 60% of the instruments in the cabin. The idea is that for myself, in terms of my students, if my students are getting 50%, they get the credit. They earn the credit and they move on to the next level. They know 50% of the material. And in some cases, if they're in this sort of limbo zone between 45 and 50, we're asked to make a determination in terms of, are you going to raise that mark to a 50%, or are you going to keep it at the 47 or the 45? Previously in our board, or in our school, for example, we were not allowed to give a mark below 10%. So if they got a 5% or a 3% or whatever, you would round up to a 10. Now we're just, you got a 7, and that's what your mark was. So in gamification, the idea is that students proceed at their own pace, but students do not go on or move on to the next level, more difficult work, until they've demonstrated that they understand the concepts. So this again is a little bit similar to the flipped classroom, in that if you're using a mastery model, you're going to have students that are moving through it at different paces. So this is, again, very challenging, because the positive thing would be if students are moving ahead, it might give you time to work with the students who have perhaps fallen behind. But another challenging thing would be that you need to provide that additional enriched activity for students who finish the unit or finish the summative task or finish that level in terms of what are they going to do next if you've got students moving at different paces. So this is a challenge in terms of how you design your classroom. Similar, related to that concept, is this idea. This is my school's honor roll. I'm not attempting to brag here. And we've got grade 9, grade 10, grade 11, grade 12, and I'm thinking that approximately we had 1,200 students in our school. And so if I did a rough count, which I did, of the grade 12s in terms of who received above 80% as an average, or achieved, not received, who achieved above 90% as an average, in total, if I've got less than 300 kids in grade 12 at my school, approximately 150 of them, or half of them, are achieving a level 4 as an average in terms of their marks. The interesting thing is if we go back into the high schools 10, 20 years ago and back through those plaques that they have, the numbers are much smaller 10, 20 years ago in terms of the amount of students who have this level 4. And so I guess my question, which I'm thinking about as I look at that, is, why? What's happened? What's the difference that has caused us from going to, 30 to 50 students 10, 20 years ago to 150 students, or 50% of our school having this level 4? And I guess the other question is this a good thing? Is this something that we should celebrate, or is this something that we should sort of raise an eyebrow to and say, are we doing what we're supposed to be doing in terms of giving people marks? Any thoughts from the group? So Colin says one of the reasons is having moved more to criteria-based assessment versus norm-based assessment. Interesting. Do you want to add to that, Colin? Just to put some pressure on you?
Yeah, absolutely. No, we don't use bell curves anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, we'd have the average was supposed to, I don't know, I'm going to pick a number, it was supposed to be 68, and it was supposed to be uniformly distributed on either side of that. I mean, people talked about curving marks and putting marks on the curve to get that right distribution, because you were supposed to have marks distributed a certain way. A certain percentage had to fail, a certain percentage, could only get 85 or above or whatever it was. And that's sifting and sorting kids. And we've moved in Ontario to a system where we set criteria that kids are supposed to meet, and we match it. Like you said, it's not quite mastery learning, but it's in that way where we have criteria that kids are supposed to meet, and if they meet that, then they achieve at a certain level. So in some ways, we could expect to have more kids at a higher mark if we're doing our job as teachers in helping more of them meet that higher standard. There's arguments both ways, I know, but that's, let's call it the ministry party line on why that might be. How's that?
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's an interesting explanation, and it's funny because you say 68%, and I'm sitting there thinking, that's what I thought average was supposed to be for the longest time. 68%, I'm higher than 68%, that's great. My class average is 72. And now I'm looking at my class averages, and they're all 3+. They're all 78, or in some cases, right, they're even low 80s. Mm-hmm. Differentiation, anything, perhaps differentiation is playing a role, so that's an interesting possibility. Maybe we're giving students more choice or different opportunities to demonstrate learning. So that's great. I don't know, I always find it interesting that we spend a lot of time, obviously, in terms of detailing from 50 to 100. I don't spend very much time detailing between 0 and 50. And so how do I assign a mark when the student is unsuccessful on that essay or that sort of thing? Do I give them the 35%? If they get 35, they can go to summer school for 2 weeks and get my course. Or do they get 12% or whatever? So we've got a lot of detail for one half where most people fall, not much detail for the other half. So how do we determine really precisely where that student is falling on 50% of the marks from 0 to 50. So that's interesting that a lot of our rubrics start from 50 and go to 100. So I'm going to move on. And in terms of gamification, as I mentioned before, what a lot of these people who are gamifying their classroom are saying is, I want to take back the A. I want to make students earn the A in terms of accumulating points or accumulating grades to determine that they are proficient. And we're not going to move to the next unit, or that student's not going to move to the next unit until they've demonstrated learning of the last unit. And so, again, if that's successful, you're going to have these high marks, but students are going to be moving at different paces in terms of that student needs to do a little bit of work before they can retake that math test that they got 67 in, because I'm not accepting anything else in my gamified unit except for a level 4, demonstrating 80%. So going along with some of those ideas in terms of this accumulation of points is we have our learning skills here on the left. We report on those, we observe them, we track them, we report on them different ways, and then we have our marks or grades on the right. And so we accept that this is how we do things, and we realize that there's a connection between these two groups, but in terms of how I design my assessment and evaluation tasks, they have to focus on the right in terms of the marks, even though I know that organization, independent work, that sort of thing is going to determine, in a lot of cases, how successful students are going to be. Or it could have a significant impact when we have somebody who might be understanding the material just as well as the person beside them, but because they're more organized, they get their work completed, they demonstrate initiative, they might be getting a significantly higher mark as a result. So it's interesting in terms of both this distinction between these two groups and also the relationship, obviously, between them. So getting down to what might assessment and evaluation look like in a gamified unit, which I assume is sort of the question for this particular webinar. This looks complex, hopefully it's not too difficult to sort of fathom, is this is an example in terms of a myth unit that we use with our grade 9 academic English class. And basically, it could have been done the opposite way in terms of level 1 being at the bottom and level 4 being at the top. But what we've got here is level 1. They have 4 tasks. This isn't the only work they're doing while they're in level 1. There's work that's being done from teacher to students, but this is work being done in their groups, and we try to balance things in terms of having both solo activities and group activities. The red indicates what we would call a formative task, and then the blue would indicate things that are the major assignment for that particular level, which they need to complete, and obviously the formative tasks are going to lead to that summative task. So they would do those tasks first, and that would lead to that. Once they had completed everything for level 1 as a group, they would then proceed to level 2 if they've demonstrated understanding of it. So they would get a mark assigned to them based on what they achieve for, in this case, a group quest, and they do a presentation on these 12 archetypal characters. But as a group, they're accumulating points, and the points are being used for the competition with their group members. So for me, I can't just assign points, I don't think, for every single thing that they do in class that are going to count for their grades. So what I'm trying to do here is differentiate between the summative tasks, where they're ready to demonstrate their learning, and the formative tasks, which are preparing them for that moment of demonstration. Also in this, hold on, I think, is that, yeah, I see your question, Beckett. I can show you, yeah, hopefully we'll have time and I can show you how to do a demo class on Classcraft. Okay, or I can at least show you some of it. So basically in this we've got level 1, so the student is acting as a novice, they don't really fully understand what's going on. They start taking on the role of the student, the apprentice, the disciple in level 2. Eventually, this is a myth unit, we get to the role of the hero where they're taking on this role with their avatar. And then finally, what we want to do with the level 4 tasks is get them to act as a mentor or guide. And so they're helping each other, and they're also leaving legacy pieces for future students that are going to come through grade 9. So this is basically our setup. So again, we've got this balance between solo and group activities and between formative and summative tasks. So we chose, in terms of key decisions, the fantasy theme, and that merged well with both the myth unit and with using Classcraft, and this was approximately a 4-week unit. The blending of solo and group activities, and I think what you find with some teachers is they, and maybe this is the same thing, over-organize initially and don't incorporate social activity into their gamified unit, which is obviously key, right? In order for the students to be happy and totally engaged, it can't be just we're all doing individual activities and proceeding at our own pace. There needs to be some group task, there needs to be some social interaction. So I mentioned the 3 badges over here and the idea of hiding them and students finding them as they proceeded, and so we had 3 per level for each of the 4 levels. And then we chose to call groups houses, and they wound up coming up with their house shield and designing them. And then another sort of important thing to consider is the idea of the leaderboard. So you mentioned this for Classcraft before. In this case, we had a group leaderboard as opposed to an individual one. So it didn't necessarily say that Johnny was in 25th and Susan was in 1st. It would have House Hairy Hippo leading, and it would have, House Wombat, who was in 5th. And so that would change as we proceeded through the different levels. And then I've already mentioned red quests were assessment as learning, and blue were assessment of learning. So this is basically one design of how you could do it, and this was a 4-week unit approximately, keeping in mind that students are proceeding through it at different paces. I'm not sure if we have any questions about that. I'm going to keep going. Looks like we have a little bit of time left. So these are some of the key sort of moments or ideas from that particular unit. This was a leaderboard. We do a lot with Google Docs, and basically what I did was I Googled how to construct a leaderboard, and so this is created using Google Spreadsheets, and we would use a Google form, and basically when students or groups accumulated points, you would just type in the number, and then it would automatically translate to the Google spreadsheet where this bar graph, and we can see here, you probably can't see it, but we've got House Narwhal leading, and sadly House Hippogriff is in 5th. This would be one student's avatar after 4 weeks. They found an interesting way to proceed through the levels, so they became a level 54 mage. And then this is one of the key assignments from the unit, which they absolutely loved. And we used Google Drawing and Google Docs to collaborate as teams. They constructed Choose Your Own Adventures. So this decision tree here refers to the different scenes. Each student would write 3 or 4 scenes, and at the end of each scene there would be a decision in terms of, do you run, do you fight, and you turn to page 52, and unfortunately your character dies there. And so they had a lot of fun. So I'll just look here at the questions here before I keep going. Marion's question, how do you manage students who are way ahead of their peers, or does that not happen? In this particular unit, because a lot of we had that blending of the solo and the group, most of the work happened in the class, and we did have some groups that moved ahead, but not significantly. We did have also some days where we did things as a group. So in level 4, they wind up watching a movie which has a fantasy theme and then doing certain tasks with that. So there were moments where we brought the group back. They also have, as you saw with that detailed rubric I showed you at the beginning, they have this independent study where they're proceeding through 3 different books. gathering evidence, inquiring, coming up with inquiry questions, that sort of thing at the same time. So students, if they did get ahead, that would be something that they would divert to. They would divert back to reading their book, gathering information, completing some of those independent study tasks, because for the most part, they're done outside of the class. So I'm not sure if there's any other questions here. So I'm just going to keep going, I think. Maybe I'll get a chance to show Beckett a little bit. So this was our little reflection in terms of how things went for our gamified unit. So on the left, we have what we took away as being positives, and on the right were things where we'd like to sort of investigate a little bit further. So we did definitely find increased engagement. The students didn't want the unit to end. They certainly didn't want our use of Classcraft to end. We were successful with those groups in terms of creating that sense of interdependence. We're working together, so we were really excited by that. And what we do is at the end of each unit or at the beginning of each new unit, we change up our groupings, we change up our seating plan, and we try to create that interdependence with different people. They enjoyed the avatars. They were very focused on completing their goals, and we found that we had set up the small tasks well to prepare them for the major task. So I had one question at a conference recently about the role of the teacher. I think the role of the teacher is still obviously very, very important in terms of helping them through different aspects, teaching them different things they need. Some are related to the subject area, some are related to the technology that we were using. But I think the concern I heard in the question was just that if you design this well enough, doesn't the teacher disappear? And I think the teacher always has a role in any of these things, whether it's inquiry or problem-based learning or gamification. And then on the right, we had some things we wanted to explore more. So the idea, as I mentioned before, of that giving the students multiple opportunities, we wanted to differentiate the tasks a little bit more in terms of having options when they had to demonstrate their learning, play with the pacing a little bit, our narrative in terms of the story, which was so important, consolidating it, probably just even simplifying it in terms of the story. And then I don't know if you guys have done any sort of research or looked into things like Breakout EDU, but we want to add some aspects of problem-based learning, which we think would be fantastic in terms of giving students a challenge, not necessarily with a ton of instructions, and they have to figure their way out in terms of how do they do this related to the curriculum. So these are some different things that we'd like to add to from here. Okay, so what we're going to do now, if you don't mind, is we're going to play a little game, and we still have 17 minutes, and after we've done it, then hopefully I'll have a chance to show Beckett a little bit more of Classcraft, and if anybody else wants me to show anything else in terms of what we do, then I'm happy to do that as well. So what I'd like you to do is in your browser to type in Kahoot it, and I'll bring up the game that we're going to play. And they just added this in terms of having a team mode they added to Kahoot for those of you who play it. Let me turn down the music here a little bit. I cannot change the music, but I can turn it down. So you can see the PIN number here at the top. You're going to type that in, 468664. No naughty nicknames, please, or you're going to be in big trouble. No idea who YARP is. Very uncomfortable. So we have Colin, YARP, JB. A couple things while you guys are getting into the game. There are 10 questions. You get more points depending on the faster you answer the question. Ski Canada, hello. And in some cases there is one correct answer. In some cases there are 4 correct answers. So we have 7 players. I'll just wait a couple seconds more and then we'll start. All right. Okay, so it looks like we're going to start. So you will have 10 seconds to answer the question. Oh, Beckett's in here. Okay, we're going to start. First question for you. What is gamification of learning? So you have to select one of those 4 options. Okay, so I think we had some new Kahooters. I don't know if that's a word, but one person that answered the question. So maybe it was the amount of text that people found baffling. So we have rethinking how curriculum could be delivered in a game format, attempting to increase engagement, creating a friendly competition. Friendly competition is key, and taking elements of games and applying them in school. So we can see that Gigi was the one person that answered it. Let's see how we do on question 2. The question is, what is game-based learning? I believe there's only one correct answer for this one. We have 2 answers so far. We have 3. We have some sadness. Okay, so using a game to make connections to curriculum. So my example earlier was the history class where they use Risk. And Ski Canada is firmly in first place. Poor Gigi has slipped to 4th. So not a learning management system. And 2 answers, 4 answers, 5. Okay. So 6 people answered. So it's a behavioral management system in terms of rewarding, and if you wish, penalizing students for behavior in the classroom. It can be used in any subject area, and I think it can be used in both elementary and secondary. Ski Canada is still ahead. Where do students start in terms of points? So this is a shift in mindset for us as educators, I think, a little bit, in terms of they start at 0. And so for Lee Sheldon, whose book mentioned a couple of times, he tells his students on the first day, you all have an F, you have 0 points, and you have to accumulate enough points in the class to receive a whatever grade that you're looking for. That is totally unfair. Colin is in the lead. Okay. PowerPoint's often visually tracked and shared with students. Picture may be a slight hint. Okay. So again, keep in mind how you want to use the leaderboard, and there are simple ways to construct them. You can even make one that's not electronic, but you want to be careful in terms of, do I have every student individually with their name on it on that leaderboard? This was a question that we asked. I'm thinking there might be multiple answers that are correct here. Okay. So additional ways of achieving points, optional activities. It's interesting how students actually like activities that are optional, additional challenges for those who wish, and then it can reward individual and group accomplishments. 4 questions left. I think all 4 got it correct. And something different from school. So this is one of the key ideas behind gamifying, is attempting to give your students multiple opportunities to demonstrate that learning. Okay, so in terms of increasing engagement with your gamified unit, assignment, lesson, or I have seen whole courses gamified as well, that story or theme that arches through the whole unit is really, really important and will keep students drawn into what you're doing. And Colin has dominated the last 4 or 5 questions, or maintained his lead. So again, I think we've gone over some of these ideas. Students move at their own pace, sometimes called mastery learning, multiple opportunities, face challenges when they're demonstrated that they're ready to actually face them. And then this last concept I really like as well, students are working within their ability zone. So not too difficult tasks, I don't know if you would call that a Goldilocks task, where it's just right, it's just slightly challenging for them, just above their current abilities, and that will help them in terms of feeling challenged as they move through the material. And Colin's our winner, and we have SKU Canada in 5th with Beckett AM. I don't know if it's AM or AM, and then we have Allison. Okay, so I'm going to ask Colin to return to the Blackboard classroom. Thank you. And this sort of brings us relatively close to the end. Oh, Mariette can see the questions on the projection, but can't, I'm guessing, can't choose them. So that was a challenge. Okay, sorry about that. So, in terms of showing you guys anything else before we go, Beckett, I think, mentioned showing you a little bit of classcraft. Did anybody want anything else in terms of questions to see some things? Linda was unable to see those questions as well.
Yeah, and that's just, we were sort of talking in the chat as you were going through the Kahoot. It works, like we're seeing, it works better in a class with, you know, the projecting up on the board and then kids having devices or computers in their hands to go through it. Folks here were trying to switch back and forth between one screen or another, and poor Mariette was on a tablet and, you know, was unable to sort of see everything coming up at the same time. So just the nature of doing it this way was maybe not the most ideal for people. I had 2 screens going at the same time because I've got a setup here for moderating, so that was my technical advantage. But
right.
in a classroom done sort of in the traditional way does work very, very well. Just, you know, yeah, Mariette's competitive, so that's the problem, right? We're all competitive once something like this gets going, which is very interesting because it shows, I think, that gamification works even for adults, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the students, once they adjust to the idea of seeing the questions and then responding on their computer or whatever, they really love it for sure. Should I show classcraft before we go? Would that be the plan?
Sure, we've got about 5 minutes. I guess folks would like to see. Yes, please. Can we get up to yes? Sure. Yeah, let's have another look at what you do.
Okay. Can you guys see that at this point?
I don't know, but other folks let us know. What I see is, yeah, Alison says, no, I see you're sharing your OTF Connects screen. You're not actually sharing, you're not actually sharing your browser.
Okay, bring me back one more time and I'll see if I can.
Here, I stopped you. Maybe try resharing it and then share your browser.
Okay.
There
it
we
looks
go.
like it's working now.
Yeah, that looks better.
Okay. So, let's in terms of Okay, so let's see. I'll pick the demo class that I currently have, and they automatically generate this. And so this is what I initially have as default settings in terms of both the rewards that I can give out for students. So these, in my classes, I would have already changed these, but it says finding mistake in the class notes, correctly answering a question, helping another student with his classwork, being positive and hardworking in class. So you can, as I said, tailor these. So I would have some connected to our use of technology. I would have some in terms of answering an original question, meaning one that hasn't been asked before, and also some in terms of answering another student's question would be some of my points that I would give out. And you can give out points to either one person at a time or everybody. So if 30 people had done something, you would just click off the 3 people that hadn't, and you could assign points that way. And here's your opportunity to deduct them. So in terms of absences, I wouldn't necessarily do that, but sometimes if students were late consistently, that might be something that you could put in there, arriving late to class, that sort of thing. So these are sort of default settings that you can adjust. In terms of powers, they are organized into the 3 classes. So we have the mage, the warrior, and the healer. And so for the mage, these are some of the points. Now, keep in mind that if people lose points for whatever reason, in terms of behavior or that sort of thing, you can even have symbolic death. And so it helps to have a mage or a healer in there who can heal them or whatever. So teleport, again, are you comfortable with this? This student can then change places with any other classmate, and they would randomly be able to use that if they had sufficient points to use it. Invisibility, the mage can leave the class for up to 2 minutes, so maybe that takes the place of asking to go to the washroom. I just used my invisibility spell, Mr. Schellenberg. Are you comfortable with that? That's what they would usually do, and I would say, yeah, I'll see you in a minute or two, assuming they didn't abuse it. And then we scroll down and we've got the warrior. The warrior can help other people. Warrior can eat in class. Again, you'd have to decide if you're comfortable with that. Maybe they can have water and they can get a drink. And then we have the healer in terms of their spells. And so these unlock as they move up in levels and they gain additional abilities. So these are the powers in terms of their initial preset. Then we have sentences. These are punishments, basically, for people. And again, you can tailor them, and you could assign them to students, or they could be random. I did not use these. And then what the students really love is the random events that start each day. So if you combine random events with behaviors, plus their use of powers, they love it. And so you can see different things here. A random team has been selected to join a band of pirates if they successfully speak with pirate accents for the class period. If you don't like pirate accents, you might not keep that. And we can go through here. Cataclysm, Gertrude, an evil teacher hag, torments the teachers. 4 random players must answer a general knowledge question. I would probably keep that question. Might be Cataclysmic Schellenberg, I'm not sure. Yeah, so basically you go through and you can tailor the individual things, and what they love about this is the random nature of it. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative, and as they proceed up through the levels, they get to do things like tailor their avatar or get access to additional powers, which usually gives them additional responsibility in the class. So there is a lengthy list in terms of options here. Okay. Any other questions? I think we're at 9 o'clock, or close to.
Well, maybe what we can do, Derek, is just wrap it up here. And if anybody has any other questions, they can just stick around for a few more minutes. That way we sort of respect everybody's time. But if anybody wants to stick around for a few more minutes, feel free to do that and ask a few more questions. I'm just going to pop back to our final So that was Derek's thanks. I'm going to go down to, sorry about that, to the OTF. Next one. Thank you slide from OTF. There we go. I knew it was going to be here sooner or later. So thanks for everybody for being here, and obviously thanks for Derek for putting on a really cool introduction to gamification. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot here as well, and hope everybody else did as well. Just a couple of quick things before we go. There's a link here to the feedback page, the feedback survey. Those of you who've been here before know that when you close out of Blackboard Collaborate, it will automatically pop up in your browser. And we really ask that you take a few minutes and fill out that survey, both for OTF and for Derek. It just helps him keep improving the program as we go along. You will get the opportunity after you've completed the survey to print off a certificate of participation that you can add to portfolios and that sort of thing, showing folks that you are in fact directing your own PD. As that's one of the things that is, we really want to be able to show people that we do like to learn things when they're meaningful to us. So please do that as well. You can also check out the OTF Connects calendar for upcoming sessions. We got a few more actually game-based learning in math is tomorrow night with Brian Aspinall, and there's a couple of other math and game things coming up I know in the next little while. We got about another 6 weeks or so. They go to the end of May, the OTF sessions. So you can check those out at any time, and we'd be really happy and love to see you back for another session before the end of the school year. And then last but not least, OTF also offers subsidies for teachers who are looking to complete AQs and ABQs, particularly in math right now. So you can check out the link on the OTF website and get that information. So without further ado, I'm going to say again thanks to Derek and thanks to everyone for being here, and on behalf of OTF, wishing everybody a great evening. We'll stop the recording now.